Yes, hello. So today, I'd like to talk about the conflict between Iran and the United States. Specifically, I want to discuss the impact this may have on Japan, especially in areas we're involved in, such as EVs, the hotel and tourism industry, agriculture, and so on. I'd like to focus on the economic and market aspects and talk about how things might develop. First of all, basically, President Trump is not the kind of president who initiates wars. Rather, he tends to act in ways that stop wars. Fundamentally, that's the direction he has been moving in as president. Well, looking at the situation this time, I believe the underlying intention was that by eliminating Soleimani, the ongoing internal conflict or various other disputes would finally come to a definitive end. However, it appears that Soleimani's son, along with Khamenei, stepped in to immediately succeed him in his role. And quite tragically, it has been reported that his wife and child were also killed in the process. Because of these developments, there is a profound sense of deep-seated resentment building up, and it seems highly likely that they will choose to respond quite strongly to these events. As for whether this will actually lead to war, that's still something to be determined going forward, but I think there is currently a tendency for this conflict to drag on for a while. Well, for President Trump, having this situation drag on wasn't originally the goal, but in reality, for the American economy, the fact that this is dragging on isn't necessarily having a negative impact. In fact, there are actually some positive factors. One of them is, of course, the surge in oil prices. If oil from the Middle East doesn't reach its destinations, on the left, there's Iran. If oil can't cross that strait, well, Japan is also being affected right now, isn't it? Regarding the surge in oil prices, actually, the United States has now become an oil-producing country, and it's even become an exporter. So in that sense, there are factors that actually work in America's favor. So if this situation drags on, it's not necessarily a negative for the United States. In other words, there's no real need to rush to resolve it. Well, that's how it is. Well, there might be some speculation at play here. That said, with war, you never really know how things will turn out. And as for this conflict, whether it will drag on or not, we just can't say. But even in the short term, it's a question of what kind of impact it will have. First, let's talk about EVs. Regarding EVs, one thing is that if oil prices rise, gasoline will become more expensive. In fact, prices are already trending upwards. So in that sense, when it comes to EV sales, you could say this situation is actually a tailwind. Yes, with prices going up, I think there is a situation where EVs will start to gain traction. However, as time goes on, this will also start to affect electricity prices. So in the end, it comes down to how much of a price difference will actually emerge. Basically, the longer this drags on, the more likely it is that the trend toward EVs could accelerate a bit sooner. That's what I think, yes. So with what's happening now and with the rise in gasoline prices and such, well, as oil prices go up and gasoline becomes more expensive, I think it's fair to say that there could be an increase in people considering buying EVs. Yes, and then there's agriculture. From the consumer's perspective, there are also factors causing prices to soar in agriculture, especially things like fertilizers and so on, since Japan relies almost entirely on imports for these. As an island nation dependent on imports, Japan is particularly vulnerable to the effects of this war. Since we are not connected by land, the only way to transport goods is by ship. Well, there are airplanes, but airplanes can't carry that much. So we rely almost entirely on ships. That's why Japan is especially susceptible to the effects of wars happening around the world. In agriculture, this means that the cost of raw materials goes up and we end up being affected by that. Yes, even with our shiitake mushrooms, for example. I think we inevitably have to deal with the impact on raw materials, especially things like logs. Yes, however, when it comes to passing on the increased costs, since I sell directly to supermarkets and such, there are limits to how much I can raise prices, but I think we have no choice but to adjust prices accordingly and continue selling. Also, well, since we rely on imports and our food self-sufficiency rate is low, in that sense, as import costs rise, the overall costs also increase. So, you could say that the prices of vegetables and agricultural products as a whole are going up. As for hotels, yes, tourism, I myself am involved in travel and hotels. So regarding hotels, what kind of impact is there? Well, I think that probably inbound tourism numbers may not change that much. In fact, there's even a possibility that they could actually increase. That's because the situation around the Middle East is becoming dangerous. So originally in that region, people who were planning to go there, especially to places like Dubai, which is a country with a very active tourism industry, might change their plans and come to Japan instead. That's one possibility. On the other hand, since that area often serves as a transit hub, there are a lot of flights that go through Dubai. So, in that sense, there's also a tendency for those people to stop coming. And inevitably, when a war breaks out, when such conflicts occur, the movement of people tends to slow down. So I think there is a possibility that it could have some impact. And then there's solar power. Yes, regarding solar power, well, yes, we observed a very similar situation unfolding during the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, but there tends to be a significant and renewed focus on the importance of solar power in such times. This is because there are actually a lot of different countries that depend heavily on the importation of foreign oil supplies. So, there is a growing tendency to think deeply about the strategic necessity of producing energy locally and making sure it is generated domestically within the country. Yes, once again, solar power is like this. It was reconsidered during the Ukraine and Russia situation, right? That led to an increase in the adoption rate, so I think the same thing will probably happen again this time. Right now in Japan, there's a kind of anti-mega solar movement going on, but in reality, the introduction of solar power is actually progressing steadily. Installing it on buildings and such is becoming increasingly necessary. Ultimately, solar power is something that will become absolutely essential to realizing renewable energy. So, when it comes to solar power, I think that with events like this war, there's a possibility that countries will once again reconsider their own energy sources. Yes. And another thing is, for us, it's digital signage, right? Digital signage is, well, not really affected by it. Well, I think there are neither positives nor negatives to it. Yes, that's right. Maybe there could be some impact, but at the moment, I don't think there has been any such effect. Generally speaking, conflicts like these tend to occur periodically around the world. Various things happen, but Japan is actually a country that is affected each time, so when such things happen, yes, it's not about whether it's good or bad, but rather, by carefully interpreting which direction things are moving, it's extremely important to protect your own assets and to consider how to add value to your own business. So while keeping an eye on the situation, I think it's necessary to steer things properly. This time, it's a clash between Iran and the United States. So what kind of impact will it have? What kind of effect will it have on the businesses we are currently engaged in? I've shared with you what we know at this stage. If there are any further changes, I would like to update you again in this way. Thank you very much.